Am I attacking Chris Norland? Well, you'll let me know. But before I begin, the inspiration for this video is sort of an irony I found, because I've been following Chris for a while and I enjoy his channel. But I need to start with a hypothetical story. And the story has similarities with Chris's story, which if you do some research, you'll find out. I'm not going to try and belabor it. But again, I'm using a hypothetical because I think if I talk about the specifics, some of you will get upset. So let's move to the hypothetical story. We're 10 years ahead. It's 2037. And the U.S. has been in a war with Iran for 10 years, since today. And it hasn't really been going well. During these 10 years, Iranians have basically split into two groups. There's a group that wants a secular Iranian government, and we'll say they're from the south. And then there's the northern Iranians, which are run by the mullahs, which are in power today. So the U.S. takes over part of Iran near Kuwait, which you can see here. And they have a huge base in Bandar Mashar. And some Iranian women have some relationships with some servicemen, get pregnant, have some children. The servicemen either leave, pretend the baby's not theirs, or they just get sent away, or who knows what. It's war, right? A lot of stuff's going on. But the bottom line is Iranian women can't bring these babies home because Iran is divided. But still, even if it's divided, there's still cultural norms about children, right, out of wedlock. So anyway, these babies end up. Many of these babies end up at an orphanage, and in 2037, the war starts to come to a close, or I should say, the U.S. starts to withdraw. So U.S. is withdrawing, and what are they going to do with these babies? They're afraid the North might overrun this base, the South, and then these babies, they just don't want to abandon the babies to that fate. So they decide to airlift the babies out. So they bring in an airlift, and they load hundreds of these babies in this thing to fly them to the U.S. or Europe or wherever. And 20 miles in, the plane crashes. Most of the babies die. But some of the babies, and a baby that has a parallel in what we're going to talk about, survives, ends up going to the U.S., is hyper intelligent, ends up in Ivy League schools, goes to University of Pennsylvania, Brown, even serves in the Navy for a while. So 40 years later from there, let's say 2077, how do you think that child is going to look back on this time? But of course they won't remember any of it, right? Because their birth started at the end of the U.S. involvement with Iran. All right, so you can do your research and figure out how that story makes sense. Also, who was this baby's father? Now, would that kid who was born then, would he want to talk about it? Should he talk about it? Right? So keep that in mind. So here's Chris Norlund. And these are the videos that inspired me to make this video. He did a video, they're talking all-out war, they're bombing the Iran deal. And I was going to go through these videos and comment on his commentary, but I decided just to do it this way. And this is his channel, the beginning of his YouTube channel. It says, Chris Norlund, I explain the news, you stay sane. And I think he's done that. And here's his website where he says, the news doesn't have to make you furious. Again, this is the context of, I'm going to talk about what's going on with the Iran war, some parallels to other wars. And we're going to talk about how the war is presented to the American public or to people, and does that have anything to do with what's going on? I believe it does. You can't just talk about government policy and not talk about how it's being talked about, how society is dealing with it. the cultural norms about what you can talk about and what you can't talk about, or what you want to talk about versus what you don't want to talk about. So from Chris's point of view, he feels that there's just, you can read this yourself. He says there's too much rage, fear, and drama, but he does the opposite. He takes the biggest story. He says where it came from, what's really at stake, what comes next, honest, calm, no performance. And he says, his top thing over here is, truth over outrage, always. And this is where I disagree. I believe you have to have outrage. And there's a certain amount of a generational split here. I think boomers have a lot of outrage about what's going on with Gaza and Lebanon and Iran. And we feel we have to have outrage because it's that important. I mean, even by everybody's account, 60 to 70,000 people in Gaza have been killed. Women, children, lots of people killed. And, at least 70% of their homes completely destroyed. So think about this, 1,000 Hamas, whatever, revolutionaries, went over the barrier, killed some Israelis, and now 2 million Palestinians have had their homes destroyed, are living in tents, aren't getting good food or health care, sewage. I mean, it is really, really bad. And it's not reported in the press very much what's really going on because Israel will not allow outside reporters into Gaza to this day. So that makes me, I'm outraged at that. I don't believe you can, but okay, you want to talk about the truth over outrage. What is the truth about that? And in this case, what we're going to talk about here, what is the truth about Iran? I mean, okay, Chris is like, we're not going to do outrage here. We're going to talk about the truth. But is he talking about the truth of Iran? Right? So we're going to get to that. Here's Chris 10 years ago when he was trying to do films. He dyed his hair. He's wearing a fancy jacket. Anyway. So this is one of the clips from one of those videos that I think is illustrative of some things we're going to talk about.
Yourself.
One of the ways to think about the Straits is that there are a bunch of guys living in caves that live in the Straits that may or may not be in steady communication with the people that we're negotiating with, who have stuff, like little better than a rubber band that they could shoot at a boat. And whether there be a few more of those or not is something that nobody knows. But the bottom line is that there are very good faith negotiations going on with leaders that Jared and Steve trust. And we expect very much that this is going to be something that cruises to normalcy sometime really, really soon.
I hope we go towards normalcy. I mean, we got to get these people out of office. He's talking about rubber bands and such and living in caves. Great, fantastic. These people are so deeply unqualified and unserious. It should be obvious to anyone who looks. This is what Iran is saying.
So what Chris is saying is, and I agree with to a point, is these guys are unqualified. I mean, talking about rubber bands and caves, I mean, it's just silly, right? We need to get some qualified people in there to fix things. But is that true? I don't believe it is. It's not about having the right people in, like, let's say, the White House, and then we won't have war with Iran, or we won't have Gaza, or Lebanon, or Syria, or any of the other problems in the world. Because if we just take Gaza, for example, right? I mean, Biden was president during it. He kept giving Israel weapons to bomb all these homes. And then he left, and then Trump is in power, and now Israel's still getting the same weapons. It's still doing the same thing. There really hasn't been any change in U.S. policy, whatever that is, with Israel. This happens behind the scenes. And so for Chris to talk about the news as if, okay, we just need smarter people there and then things will be fixed, is, to me, sorry, it's naive. But it allows his audience to sort of to no longer feel responsible or have any sort of blame in this, right? You can watch his video and you could say, oh, yeah, the rubber bands, caves, this guy is really out to lunch. We need to get some intelligent, rational people in there, and then things will be much better. I mean, I wish that were true. I really do. But I'm going to explain why it's not. Again, we're going to talk about the Vietnam War. And again, I did the hypothetical, but this is actually this is what produced Chris Norlund many years ago in 1975. So many people, I don't think many people, young people today, understand what happened in Vietnam. Even for me, much of it happened before I was born. So what happened is that after World War II, right, all the superpowers, every country is jockeying for position, for geopolitical strength. They're trying to extend their power as far out from their borders as possible because that makes them stronger. You don't want your enemy right on your border. And this informs geopolitics since the beginning of recorded history. So the French had a colony in Vietnam, and Vietnamese locals basically went to war with them from 1946 to 1954, so basically right after World War II. And they pushed the French out. The French just basically was like, we've had it. Okay, we can't take it anymore. Fine. Vietnam, go on your own. We're leaving. But then from the U.S. point of view, it was like, well, okay, I mean, Vietnam can't deal with it. But China is supporting these Vietnamese into, taking over Vietnam. So China's going to have a lot of power in Vietnam. And China is communist like Russia. We have to remember China and Russia share sort of a communist shared history and values. Anyway, or political parties that were close to each other. So the United States is, okay, well, we can't let China basically take all the way down into Vietnam. We need to push back. And because we're the Marshall Plan, we're trying to do a global new order of many countries aligned with us, now including Japan and Germany. We need to protect our order. We can't allow the communists, and I don't mean communists as in, an economic way of life. I'm talking about communist parties. Again, these parties of people that are in power. We can't allow them to go take all, as much of the world as they can. Somewhere we have to push back. And the United States is the only one that has the power to do this. France doesn't, or didn't. And again, this is not stupid, right? I mean, it may be wrong, but it's not unintelligent. It's not like there's no rational reason behind it. We're not talking about rubber bands or living in caves here. We're just talking about a geopolitical reality where the U.S. feels China can't basically extend its power through Vietnam. So in 1961, when I was born, Kennedy sent advisors into Vietnam, and it went up to roughly 16,000. And even at the time, people were saying, oh, we shouldn't do this, we have to leave them alone, blah, blah, blah. And, but of course, the media in the United States did not cover it that way. What the State Department, the story it wanted to tell, was that the Vietnamese wanted to be democratic, but they were being overrun by this ruthless communist regime in the north, allied with China, and they wouldn't be able to be free. We needed to protect them. Does that sound familiar to you today? Right? What does the news say about Iran? It's about how the Iranians want to be free, and we need to get rid of the mullahs so they can be free, right? Now, is there something to that? Yes. We'll get to that. Then as now, but how much? Anyway, so Kennedy sends his advisors, the ones that the U.S. has backed, he gets killed in a coup. And then there's the Tonkin Gulf incidents. And like many things, nobody's positively sure what happened. But historians now agree that nothing happened to the level that would justify the U.S. sending in ground troops and bombing the bejesus out of Vietnam, which is what they did started in 1965. So they had taken an event and they had made it into something more than it was. And again, you can see parallels today where we talk about Iran with these nuclear weapons, that they're going to use nukes on people, right? They're going to blow away Israel, the United States, or whatever. And but the United States said this past summer, oh, we got rid of them. We did these bunker busting bombs, and we got all the nuclear material, so we're good. We got the problem solved. Now all of a sudden, no, they didn't really do it. The problem's back. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's just a lot of manipulation of the story by the media that comes from the State Department that is trying to frame what's going on in a way that the public will accept as the reason and ignore, because the people behind wars from nations, that sort of deep state defense industrial complex patriotism, whatever it is, those people, they have an agenda which goes back to history against all nations, want to extend out the borders, whatever. Anyway, they have plans, they have ideas, they want to get things done. And they can't tell the public the truth because, as one of the greatest lines in movies, you can't handle the truth. And I agree with you, the public can't handle the truth because it doesn't spend enough time researching or thinking or whatever, which is fine. So anyway, so we're at war with Vietnam to save the Vietnamese from the bloodthirsty, freedom-hating communists, right? And that's what the public is being told. But then during a holiday, right? It's always during a holiday, right? Same thing with 10/7, right? So during a holiday, the North Vietnamese do this massive attack against Saigon, all parts of Vietnam. It's called the Tet Offensive. And in a military sense, it failed. It didn't boot the United States out. But Americans were so believed what they were being told that, oh, we have control of, Vietnam, don't worry, eventually we'll get rid of the North Vietnamese, we'll free the Vietnamese. And here, no, it was a lie. Like, they're not almost beaten. They're coming in, they're attacking all over Saigon, everywhere. They're much more powerful than you're telling us. Even if I'm a stupid American and don't even believe anything Walter Cronkite is saying, I get it. You're lying to me. And, that's what happened historically. So then the beginning of the end was 1971, which is around 6 years after the U.S. really went into Vietnam in a big way. The Pentagon papers come out where they talk about, one of the guys, I forget his name, talks about he was in the room with everybody in the past 10, 20 years, whatever, doing this. And he had said that by his calculation, the desire to save the Vietnamese from the communists was like 10% of it. The rest of it was making sure the U.S. looked good to its allies, to others like Germany, Japan, whatever, that it would protect the world order. And part of it was just that the U.S. had to show that it was the superpower. It had to exert force to push back on the Chinese and then the Russians. Now, what's interesting about this, by the way, is that the Russians, and again, I hope, like everything I'm telling you, like, that sounds familiar. Like, where have I heard that recently? So the Russians started giving the North Vietnamese these anti-aircraft missiles. Because, again, the U.S. at that point was just running roughshod all over Vietnam. And China didn't have that technology for the North Vietnamese to defend themselves, unlike today. So back then, Russia gave them, they didn't have to give them much, gave them some, and then started shooting down American bombers and fighters. All very interesting historical stories that I encourage you to go research. Anyway, bottom line is that 1975 is the fall of Saigon. That's when Chris Wright was put on that plane, ended up in America. You know the rest. So here he is talking about the Iran war as if it's an issue. The problem is that we have stupid people in the White House, irrational people, and too much partisanship or whatever. He says in his videos like, oh, well, the Democrats were in there trying to decide, is this good for our midterm elections or bad for midterm elections? Now, are the Republicans, is it a factor in those things? Yes, it is, but it has nothing to do with why we attacked Iran. Nothing. There's no Republican that was in a room that said, I think it'll be good for elections. Let's look strong and attack Iran. Well, maybe there was one person or whatever, but that's hardly any of it. I don't believe anybody thinks that that's an issue. Today, again, as we know, what they thought from the Pentagon papers back in the 60s and 70s. So the people that are, why we're attacking Iran, there are many reasons for it, and people discuss it, but they're not in the mainstream press because the mainstream press basically just rewrites press releases from the State Department, and it's always been that way. So Chris, as an American, again, he knows nothing about, he didn't experience Vietnam. He's a product of it, but he didn't experience it. But he and his generation are making the mistake of believing that the government is just a matter of being rational. That if we're just polite to each other and rational, that we can fix things. And that's why people get upset at some of my videos and they feel I'm attacking somebody. They're like, oh, you're attacking him. You're part of the problem. Stop attacking him. That's the problem. We're attacking. Is it? Is that the problem? Or is the problem that the United States feels that China, by getting very cheap oil from Iran, because China buys 90% of Iranian oil, that's able to grow its military larger, because all militaries run on oil and gas and coal, whatever. They don't run on renewables. So the United States is like, okay, China's getting too strong by having the sweetheart, low-cost oil deal from Iran, because Iran is, has to sell them cheaply because we have sanctions. But Iran doesn't want to come over to our side, and that's just a long story I can't go into, or I could go into, but I want to keep the video short. So that's really what's going on. And that the whole Israel connection, again, that's another big thing. But I would say in general, no, this isn't all being directed by Israel. This is from the United States. Israel, in a sense, is just an outpost, sort of like a proxy army of the United States. And the United States has tried to deal with Iran since 1979, is sanctioning, trying to weaken it, trying to get rid of, trying to get them to bend to the U.S. will, and they haven't. And now they've started a war with Iran that I believe will go on for another decade, like the Vietnam War. And I'm not the only one. Many people do. But for Chris, he's using his intelligence to show how the news, how there are all these inconsistencies in the news. So he shows a guy who's talking about rubber bands and living in caves, and he says, oh, well, that doesn't make logical sense. So yeah, if we get rid of the people who don't make logical sense, things will be better. But this is the issue here. Now here's another one to kind of end on. So here's the anti-intellectualism in American Life by Richard Hostau. This was written near when I was born, like 1961, 1962. And one of the things he talks about is the difference between intelligence and intellect. So intelligence is what we all admire, is the intelligence to put things together and become successful. So Chris Norlund figured out that, oh, okay, the news has a problem where it's very partisan, it's very attack-oriented, full of outrage, whatever. I'm going to tell the news the way my generation wants to hear without all that. I'm just going to sit back and just talk about it very objectively and unemotionally so we can, improve the world. We can be a better world. And so I admire Chris's intelligence that he can figure out, how to put it, set up his mic, his camera, do the show every day, handle social networking on Instagram, Facebook, wherever, for him to build a news commentary channel. And what he says is very intelligent. He's highly educated. He knows all the basic things. So, yeah, Chris Norlund is super high in intelligence. But what about intellect? Is he an intellectual? Is it good or bad that he is or is not an intellectual? An intellectual is somebody, and I love that quote from this book that somebody said that an intellectual takes an answer and makes a question out of it. And that's not really what he's doing, right? So when the guy says, oh, they're fighting with rubber bands, that's his answer. But I would say, no, they're not fighting with rubber bands. I'm going to make that a question. What are they fighting with? Well, the answer is they're using missiles. They used missiles during the 12-day war to attack Israel and hit buildings 1,000 miles away with pinpoint accuracy, to hit billion-dollar radars in the Gulf Coast countries, Gulf Council countries, with these missiles flying 100 miles, away. Is that technology like a rubber band? How many countries have that technology? Not many. Not many at all. In fact, I'd say the U.S. doesn't have missiles that match what Iran is producing. That's intellect. That's intellect questioning what we know with other facts. Intelligence would take those facts and put them together, right? So intelligence is Chris saying, oh yeah, this sounds stupid. That is very intelligent to point out why it's logically, not right. But it's intellect to question, what are we being told about the Iran war? What is really happening? How do geopolitics work? What's the connection between what we did in Vietnam and what's happening in Iran? Anyway, I hope you got something out of the video. Again, I just find it interesting that somebody's a product of the Vietnam War is not using that to explain the Iran war, though again he has no memory of it, but he has the intelligence to do it. But he's not switching over into the intellect area or giving coverage to intellects that cover it. Anyway, where am I at? 28 minutes. Whoa, that's way too long. I'll see you later.